I was hearing voices. I thought God was talking to me. I thought that, the police could hear everything that was thinking, and it tore down, and I got into a car wreck because I was fearful of what the police were going to do to me, and I was on a mission, and I couldn't stop that mission, and so with that fear, I got into a car wreck on the last red light that I ran. I ran 3 of them, and someone passed away.
Hi, this is Solson, the host of the Teenage Impact Podcast, where we share stories, tips, and specific strategies on how you as a teenager can overcome the struggles in your life. I've interviewed over 70 people from around the world on their struggles in their life, how they overcame them, and how you can too. It is finally time. I released my book, Never Fight Alone. Never Fight Alone is 51 inspiring interviews to help you overcome your struggles and improve your mental health. I've interviewed people who were sexually abused at the age of 6 years old. I interviewed people who tried committed suicide. I interviewed people with confidence issues, eating disorders, bipolar disorder, all different types of struggles and challenges in their life. And they overcame those challenges to create their own definition of success. I want you to get your copy today. The hardcover copy is already sold out on the very first day, and it's going out fast. Get your copy today on Amazon. Click the link in the description. It's available in hardcover, paperback, and ebook. It's one of those life-changing books that can really make an impact on you. Today's podcast guest is Jonathan Lowe. Jonathan has an incredible story to share. At a young age, he was adopted, and from then on, he kept a lot of his feelings to himself. He had suicidal thoughts. He went to therapy at a young age, and he kept it in for so long, and it led to an accident when he was younger in 2010. It led to an accident where he ran 3 red lights and killed someone. Then he went to jail for a year and a half, and then a mental hospital for the next 7 years. During his stay at the hospital, he became the student body president for his college. He's studying psychology for Pueblo Community College. This is his last semester, and he has some big plans with changing some of the policies for mental health. So give it up for Jonathan Lowe as he talks about his mental health journey and how he went from someone who was suicidal to a mental hospital to becoming the student body president for his college to someone who is trying to make an impact in the mental health community. Give it up for Jonathan Lowe. Hey, Jonathan, thanks so much for tuning in. How's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Jonathan, before we actually go into the accident and what happened, can you actually lead up to who Jonathan was as a child and maybe a couple of your struggles?
Yes. I grew up in a great family, but it didn't start out that way. I was living with my birth parents until I was 2.5. There was an incident where my birth father pulled a gun on my birth mom and I and tried to kidnap me, and he was on drugs and just not in a right state of mind. And then eventually I was adopted because my birth mother could not raise me on her own. And then from there, I was adopted into the family that I have now, and they have been amazing. However, at the same time, I was also very angry at my mom because she was trying to replace my birth mother. And that didn't happen until about junior high. Before then, life had been great. There were a few issues that came up with nightmares about my birth father pulling a gun on my birth mother and I. And from there, it was just, I went to therapy from a very young age dealing with those nightmares and did EMDR, and that helped a ton. And junior high, that's where I really started to struggle with not only anger, but also identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
With the identity crisis, I and I didn't learn until later how to deal with that. As a child, I was really struggling with just how to fit in, and I didn't realize that I was a chameleon. I changed my personality based upon who I was around, and I didn't understand myself, and I didn't learn until much later that I needed to understand that if I fit in with myself, I can fit in anywhere. So I don't need to work, be with other people or change for other people. I just need to be who I want to be. And that gave me a huge boost in being able to identify who I was and how I want to be in the world. And then also with the anger towards my towards my mom, it was one of those things that I never really dealt with for a long time until many years down the road. Once I understood, like as an adult, after I moved out, then I was able to figure out how to deal with that anger through therapy and also through understanding how much my parents had been there throughout everything, which I'll share later.
Mhm. Were you still talking to your birth mother at that time?
No, I was not. There was no communication. There was a talk, like we did talk a little bit in junior high. She called my parents' place,
Mhm.
and at that point, I talked to her. I answered the phone once, and we were talking about me meeting Melanie as I started to struggle with my identity crisis and as well as my anger.
Mhm.
My family was talking about me possibly meeting Melanie, and I think it scared my family. And on top of that, I know from talking to my mom about that later on, she was talking to someone that she knew as a therapist, and they said it would not be good to introduce, another scenario into my already struggles of identity crisis. During this time, I actually was also cutting myself. So uh, instead of expressing my anger outwardly and like yelling or hitting or anything like that, I turned it internally
Mhm.
because it was something that I had to deal with myself, and it didn't help me with my family relationships or anything because I was holding back so much from my family.
Why do you think you kept it so much to yourself rather than
Um,
expressing it to your family?
I kept it to myself for two things. One, I didn't want to hurt anyone.
Mhm.
That has I understood what it was like to be hurt. From being adopted, it was like people chose my life, and I felt hurt a lot of the time, and so understanding that. And also, when you have a trauma and you're adopted, you get really good at reading people.
Mhm.
So I didn't want to hurt because I could see that they were frustrated that they couldn't connect with me. I didn't open up because I knew that me opening up would further that hurt.
Mhm. It's crazy that you say you got really good at connecting with people because I actually interviewed someone else. His name was Anthony Trucks. He was adopted too, but he was in foster care for quite some years and was abused. But he also said that he got really good at reading people
Hmm.
to who's genuine and to who's not genuine.
Yep.
So it's a really interesting point. Why do you think that is?
I know from my studies that when you have trauma, you have a heightened sense of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that awareness, you are always reading the room to see what's good and what's bad, or what's dangerous and what's
Mm-hmm.
something, what's the safe space. And in that, I was very attuned to my environment and the people around me. And it just, with that heightened awareness, I learned how to read people and be able to find out where I could be accepted and where I couldn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Now tell us about how the accident happened and what led up to the accident.
Leading up to the accident, it took about a year's time before I got into my accident, but it was a year long process. my birth mother had found me in 2009 on Facebook, and we started to talk. And during this time, I opened up to my family about her messaging me, and it was the response from my family was hard for me to deal with. They tore apart her messages, and and Melanie didn't use my last name, which they were upset about. She also used my original my original name and the way it was spelled versus the way my parents changed it to it was the same name just spelled differently. And there were little things like that, and so it brought up this fear in meeting Melanie because my family wanted to be there when I met her. I i i felt like my family was trying to get me to not show love to Melanie.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, that heightened awareness brought me to a point to where I was just really, I guess, I guess it was just trying not to hurt my mom that had raised me, and I also didn't want to hurt Melanie by not showing her the love that I actually felt. So I felt stuck in the middle. And during this year, we were planning to meet, and it took some time to set that up.
And how old were you at this time?
I was I She found me when I was 20, and then we were supposed to meet when I was 21.
Okay.
And during this time, I also was using drugs. So I was all over the place doing hallucinogenics, and it threw me into a tailspin. Also, I started working. Growing up, that was how I dealt with my emotions. I instead of being angry at my family, I would work and get away from my family because that was my escape. And so as an adult, I did the same thing. Work was my escape. It was a place that I could do really well at because I was raised to work. When I was 12 years old, I started working with my dad,
Mm-hmm.
and so in the end, it took some time, and eventually my mental health broke. My family was looking for a hospital that would accept me, and it took 5 different hospitals to finally find one that accepted me.
Mm-hmm.
And that hospital was not that great either. I was in there for 2.5 weeks, and they diagnosed me and kicked me out because I didn't have insurance. Therefore, eventually, I was faced with $850 worth of medications per month, no insurance, living alone, no job, and just in a very, very bad situation. And I was still sick. I still didn't understand why I was in the building. I didn't even understand that it was a hospital. I had no idea what was going on. And during this time that I was released, I had 2 days that were okay, and then the rest of the days were falling apart again, to a point that was much worse than I had ever had. And it was such a bad break that I eventually got in. Like I was hearing voices. I thought God was talking to me. I thought that the police could hear everything that I was thinking, and it tore down. And I got into a car wreck because I was fearful of what the police were going to do to me, and I was on a mission, and I couldn't stop that mission. And so, with that fear, I got into a car wreck on the last red light that I ran. I ran 3 of them, and someone passed away.
Wow.
And so then I went to
Do you
from
think,
there.
would you say most definitely it was the drugs, or was it just a mixture of the drugs and everything you were feeling?
I believe it was a mixture. It was the ultimate thing. Me working overtime and not taking time to rest, me not exercising. I was really, and that's something that my parents really taught us well. All
Mhm.
my brothers and sisters, is we learned to work out, and I was not doing that. I wasn't. I mean, I felt the family stress being in the middle. It was just everything. Everything imploded at that point. And in the end, someone passed away, and it started my journey of, I guess, healing. It was the universe's way of saying, you know what? No, we're gonna make you face yourself, because I was running for myself for so long.
Hmm. You took it by just driving, 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 and until you got to the accident, correct?
Yes.
And then what happened after that?
I went to jail for a year and a half.
Hmm.
In the jail system, I wasn't ready to deal with what had happened, but my response was to try to commit suicide multiple times. Cognitively, I couldn't deal with the fact that someone had passed away because of me,
Hmm.
and I also felt like my world was coming to an end because I was stuck. It was partly because I couldn't. I struggled facing myself, and not only what I had done, but everything in my life was in a little box that I was stuck in.
Hmm. Were you sentenced to a year and a half, or you got out early?
I actually was sentenced at a year and a half,
Okay.
and I was sentenced with an NGRI, which
Uh-huh.
means not guilty by reason of insanity.
Uh-huh.
And from there, you're sentenced to a day to life at a mental hospital.
Hmm.
And I'm still part of that process.
Are you
And
part of
it,
the mental hospital right now? So.
yes, I am.
Hmm.
Yes, I am. I'm still part of the process, though I've made huge strides over the years. I actually have a meeting coming up soon to get more privileges.
Hmm. And so initially, when you went to the mental hospital, what was your reaction? Was it
And
like I want to go home, or is it okay? This is a good thing for me.
it was my parents were telling me it was a good thing. I
Hmm.
didn't fully understand. I didn't understand that I could progress through the hospital.
Hmm.
So in my mind, the unit I was on was all there was, and in that, I really struggled with depression and suicidality and many things because I didn't see a future. I thought I'm stuck here, and this is where my life is going.
What got you through these moments of suicide thoughts?
For me, I mean, having someone to talk to all the time, because
Hmm.
I lived with about 26 people on whichever unit I was on, and then they also had about 5 staff members. So it was just the continued security of the general daily life. You wake up, you do your thing, and it took eventually. There was a huge change, and I started to question a lot of philosophy, and in that, I started to discover that even though that life seemed meaningless, there was still a meaning, because if I was still breathing, I was still giving back into this world. So it gave me a sense of purpose because I was giving carbon dioxide to plants. So even in this small finite world that I was stuck in, I was still doing something that was purposeful in this world.
What was that mental shift? How many years in, and what
Oh,
made
that took about 3 years to get there.
3 years? And
3 years. Well, from jail all the way to about 2 years into the hospital was a huge shift.
what got you to that shift?
Many staff members sitting down and talking to me and listening to my philosophy, and trying to help me through that, as well as a huge part was due to my continued questioning and continuing to live. I felt like through it I actually came up with a deeper meaning that has resonance no matter where I'm at in life.
Hmm.
And through questioning and really digging deep and continuing my therapy and continue pushing forward, it was one of those things that was just a slow process. In addition, I also was reading a lot of books. That was something that I learned as a child. I was homeschooled, and we read a lot on our own. We taught ourselves, and so through this reading, I was questioning religion. I was questioning, I mean, just everything about life and what its meaning was, and through that, I started to construct over periods of time where I was at.
And once you kind of had that revelation, like Did you find your purpose in life? Did you say, okay, this is what my purpose is?
I found I found my base meaning of purpose, and I personally go through times where I have to question my meaning again and adjust it. You
That's
know that one's always true, though I know as time goes on, I can always add more. Anything beyond just breathing was huge. It was just extra.
mm-hmm.
And as I go through the stages of life of the identity crisis still that I go through, I found out that there's always new changes. Life will change, so you need
Yeah.
to create a new meaning and that pertains to the current moment.
It's so powerful because you know what I preach about in some of my speaking engagements is pursuing your purpose and pursuing your meaning in life. And a lot of times high school students, they may or may not know what they want to do for the rest of their life, but it doesn't really matter because you evolve as a person, and as you have new experiences in life, your definition of what how life is supposed to be will also change. But that does not mean you do not pursue whatever is in front of you and create meaning in your life, what it is today.
Hmm. Definitely,
Yeah.
most definitely.
What would you say? What was your rituals in the hospital, especially in the beginning?
And those changed over time as well. They had in the very beginning they had a bedtime for me, I mean it was set up by rules.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, you get up at 7 a.m., you take meds, and at 8 to 9 at night you're taking your meds again, and you're going to bed at 10. And throughout the day you had to do current events, you had to watch the news, you had to do groups, and it was a ritual. I mean, even eating was on a schedule. You knew, okay, at 4:30 you're eating dinner, or at 11:30 you're eating lunch. And it at first it was consistent, so it was very helpful in me creating later on. I live on my own now, yet I still have to go to treatment there, and I still take some of those rituals. I eat at particular times. I have now even more rituals where I wake up and I go to bed, and I have a process to get to bed.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, oh, you have to go to bed. It's like, okay, I have an alarm that goes off at 8:30, and that's when I start my process to going to bed.
Mm-hmm.
I turn down electronics. I do all these different things. So looking at those rituals in the very beginning, it was made for me, but later I turned them into my own.
Mm-hmm. When did you go to college?
I started college after in the hospital. I dealt with a lot of anger,
Mm-hmm.
and I started college after I read a book called "The Obstacle Is the Way," and the gist of that book,
Obstacles of the way.
the obstacle is the way.
Obstacle of the way.
And the gist of that book is the obstacle in the path is the path. So stop looking at it as an obstacle.
Yeah.
And with my anger, I was so ticked off about the system and how they had failed me. And on top of that, the hospital had a lot of frustrations that I had. I was angry a lot of the time, and part of that part of that anger, I started to realize, okay, how can I change this into something constructive?
Mm-hmm.
And in that, I started to realize that, okay, mental health is going to become my path. I have to be healthy all the time, and I want to make something purposeful out of this journey. And I wanted to change mental health policies because of that, and so that no one else fell through the cracks. And I started school, gosh, it was 2016.
Mm-hmm.
After I got to the hospital in 2012, so it was about 4 years after.
In what college?
I started at Puebla Community College,
Gotcha.
and it was I flourished there.
And
As
you became student body president, right?
yes, within a year's time.
Wow.
And I was still living in the hospital when I was student body president. So during this process, or during the ending of my stay at the hospital, a lot of the staff members were like, "Why are you here?" And it's because of the paperwork process, and that was a big part of my frustration
Mm.
that's pushed me to go to school because I understood the process was not is not working all the time.
Uh-huh. And how do you think that fl helped you flourish as an individual, that one position?
That position helped me in many ways. It gave me a sense of responsibility. It gave me a sense of control, and it also gave me a community where I felt it was a community outside of the hospital that I felt secure in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in that, I started because for a long time I was at being adopted. I struggle with moving on from one stage of life to the next. You know, whether it means moving or letting go of the past stuff. You know, I like predictability, and with that, basically, I that was a community that was predictable, and I felt secure. And eventually, it became my saving grace when I moved out because it was still there when I moved out
Mm-hmm.
of the hospital.
Earlier, you said that you thought the system failed you. Why do you think the system failed you?
Because for one of the policies that I want to make sure that they change
Uh-huh.
is I don't think they should be able to release you without you having insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big failure. If I had insurance, I may have taken my meds
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't afford them because I didn't have a job.
Yeah.
And in that, I mean, it's one of those big flaws that I think we can fix. And on top of that, I didn't have enough education on mental illness when I was there. I still didn't understand why I was there. I didn't understand what being sick meant. I mean, they had groups and stuff, but I was just not getting it.
It had a very negative connotation.
Yes.
What do you want to do to change some of these policies? Because I know, what's your major right now?
Psychology.
Psychology, and you had a minor?
Yeah, I have a minor in sociology.
Okay. But you want to go into policy change.
Yes, I would like to go into policy change eventually, where I am thinking of going to public health with a focus on policy change.
Mhm.
It was one of those things that I discovered going to school is I started school with one direction, aiming towards a psychology and a doctorate in psychology and a doctorate in law
Mhm.
because I felt like those were it. And eventually, through interviewing people, I interviewed one of the directors of a health program here in Pueblo, Pueblo Community Health Center, and he was like, "Oh no, this is the career that you want." And right now, I'm still split. You know, I also like the personal change on an individual level,
Mhm.
and I know I could still make policy changes without the public health degree.
Mhm. What would you say like your number, like this, your top two goals are in the next 5 to 10 years?
My top two goals, I in the next 5 years, I would like to start working with NAMI,
Mhm.
National Alliance for Mental Illness,
Mhm.
or even National Institute for Health.
Mhm.
And just using their research and being able to make those changes that I see. And it's not only changes to the mental health system per se, but it's also adoption. I really want to change some of the guidelines that are around adoptees. You know, one of the big failures too was that system not sharing medical records throughout the entirety of me growing up.
Mhm.
If we had known that my birth father had a mental illness, we may have been able to catch it sooner and understood that this would come up.
Mhm.
And so there are some mental health pieces that I think would be in addition to the adoptee perspective as well.
Wow, that's very true. You know, you were talking about how you just didn't understand why you were in the hospital, And there's a very negative stigma around being in a mental hospital.
Yes.
There's a lot of people who will probably look down upon you. What would you say? What would you tell them? And how are you different after coming out of the mental hospital?
I got a tattoo, actually, I think it was like 6 months before everything happened.
Yeah,
And it was a tree. And I have a huge tattoo, and it basically represented to me at that time that you are who you are no matter what your surroundings are.
yeah.
And it was in reflection of, a bunch of houses being built around trees. They always remained the same. They remained who they were. And that was my saving grace throughout the entirety of the hospital. It was like a reminder, the hospital does not change who I am. This isn't who I am. I am who I am at the root because of who I am. It's not determined by this building that's surrounding me. So I had that little piece all the way through that helped keep me on a perspective that was helpful.
Hmm.
And oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, what are some of the pros and cons of being in the hospital?
Some of the pros and cons, they, they didn't, as much as they had consistency of schedule,
Hmm.
they didn't have consistency of punishment.
Okay.
So it seemed like everything was always unfair. Either you were getting treated better than another person that did the exact same thing and had a more severe punishment, or it was vice versa. And one lesson I learned from that is that all of life is unfair, or life is fair because it's unfair to everyone.
Hmm.
We all have our own stories, and we'll all go through our own stuff. But I mean, in the end, it was the pros and cons. I met some amazing people. Part of that was the creating of the labyrinth. It was a way to find self forgiveness, not only for myself, but for what had happened, but also learning how much how much I could do. I mean, we raised $50,000 for a memorial project at the hospital, and it was a huge influencer into me being able to find purpose again. And the pros were all the self work that I learned. I learned so many skills throughout that time. And the cons, I mean, uh, when everyone hears about the state hospital, everyone has a negative view. I just spoke to a class. The teacher was like, they think that everyone there is dangerous. And we're just normal people,
Yeah.
that had a situation where we gotten to a point to where we needed legal help, because we couldn't, we didn't understand the sense of right and wrong at that point in time.
Uh-huh.
So, and that was a journey to get over. And I mean, I really liked. There was, again, one of the books that was recommended to me in the hospital. Again, another pro. I was recommended a lot of books that helped me along this journey, and Brene Brown was a huge influencer in my life of not letting it, not having shame about my story, but just coming out stronger.
What would you say is your top book you've read?
Oof. Right now, I would say it's. I would have. There's three books that I really struggle
Your
between
top
those two.
three
Top one, I would say is Untethered Soul.
untethered soul. By who?
Michael A. Singer.
Mm-hmm.
He he has one of those things, one of those perspectives that the inner voice that we have that is always beating us up or building us up. We don't have to listen to it. It's an annoying roommate, and that's it. At the basis, we are just the conscious observer, and we go through life and do our best, and we just observe. Everything isn't always going to be there. It's going to pass,
Mm-hmm.
in that sense. And in addition, there's also another perspective that helps, which is we're one person floating on a planet that is in the middle of a galaxy that seems like a speck of dust in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So what are my problems? And it really puts things into perspective.
If you can go back when you were a teenager, when you were going through these insecurities and suicide ideations, what would you do differently? How would you approach some of the negative circumstances and negative thoughts that you were facing?
Number one, opening up to my family.
Okay.
That's a big one. And also utilizing therapy more. I that's one thing that I really struggled with then, because I felt like they were telling my parents everything. And that's not true. I mean, I've learned over the years that that is a safe space. Also, journaling and being mindful. I learned a lot of mindfulness over the years, and those are some of the influential things that I wish I had taken more seriously at that point in time.
Right now, do you talk, if you don't mind sharing, do you talk to your birth mother right now?
Yes, we actually met. It was 2 years ago now,
Uh-huh.
and I decided, instead of getting in the middle between the families like
Uh-huh.
I felt before, I met her on my own.
Uh-huh.
And there's still awkward moments, trying to figure out how do I fit into her story? How do I fit in, and how does she fit into my story? How do we work together? And I mean, we've had some tough conversations over the years, and now that one of the big realizations at that time was she wasn't going to fill that hole inside me.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that as a child, I had that dichotomy of thinking about my other family, and I thought that other family that I had been taken away from would solve all my problems,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't. It didn't. So it's been a journey of realizing that, and I worked on it a lot in therapy after I didn't think that I was going to meet her. And one day she called up, and I was like, "Sure, come on over."
You know,
So,
sometimes I feel like, we try to fill that void, whether it's from the other family or whether it's or with something else, just in general
mhm,
in life. We try to always fill a void, but when we realize that we cannot, there's nothing that can fill the void except just being present at this time and just enjoying the moment. There is no void. That void is, I feel like, is just an figure of your imagination
yes,
sometimes.
yes, and
And
it and it
us playing scenarios in our head, and from my personal experience, that's definitely not true.
Yeah, it's, I think that void is created when we search
Uh-huh.
outside of ourselves for ourselves.
Uh-huh.
Whether it's buying things, it's like, oh, this defines me, this defines me. And once we go inside and we find our definition within us, that's where I've found the most satisfaction of filling that void.
Hmm. Hmm. What's one thing you would tell a teenager who is struggling right now?
One thing that I would say is, I guess I would just say, you know, number one, reach out. You are not alone. Generally, when people commit suicide, they leave behind about 6 to 7 people, and this is researched, that are wondering what they could have done more. So
Hmm.
you are not alone, even though you feel alone. And that has been the biggest thing with multiple people that I've had that passed away due to
Hmm.
suicide. And there's always people wondering what they could do. And as that, they're wanting to reach out and they're wanting to help you. You just need to be able to voice, hey, I need help.
Hmm. Absolutely. You never fight alone, and that's the title of my book.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
It's like you did your research or something. But I end all my interviews with this one question. All my interviews, I think you're my 70 seconds or 71st. I don't know, over 70. And it's about resiliency. It's about overcoming your struggles to creating your own definition of success. But what does resiliency mean to you?
Resilience to me means instead of trying to deny your story, you own it and you create your own, like as goes
Wow.
with Dr. Brene Brown,
Mhm.
you create your own daring ending. You're not trying to be the hero. You're not trying to be the victim. You're just writing your story. That's
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
And you create the definition of who you are.
Mhm. It's powerful. It's great. And where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
If they want to find me, they can find me at JM, JML, L as in Larry, 52698 at gmail.com.
Okay. And they can
So I
just
am
email you just to connect with you, say hello, question.
definitely,
Awesome.
most definitely. And I also, I work at another place working on mental health. We are going to be starting up some online groups. So they can also reach me through friendlyharborpueblo.org and join some of the online groups that we have for
Mhm.
mental health. And you can join anywhere in the world.
Sure. And then I'll include that link in the podcast description.
All right, thank you.
Jonathan, it's been a pleasure. Honestly, man, I've learned so much just by interviewing you, and I feel like you're such an inspiration, and you have an incredible story, and it's not even over. You still got a long ways to go, and I could just feel you're going to make some great changes in the world.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm excited. I'm going to buy your book. I really want to read it. Check it out.
Great, man. All right, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this podcast episode with Jonathan Lowe. It was definitely an inspiring one. I hope you learned a lot. Like I mentioned in the beginning, if you haven't done so, purchase my new copy of my book, Never Fight Alone. It's one of those life-changing books that can help you improve your mental health and gives you actionable steps to create success in your life. Click the link in the description, or you can type in on Amazon, Never Fight Alone, Shlomo Solson. And until next time, peace.